I have my guest, EJ Anthony, on from the Heritage Foundation, an economist there, does a brilliant job. You can check him out on X. Is it at Real EJ Anthony?
You got it, Carl. That's it. Beware, there are actually
All right.
a lot of crypto scammers out there. But yeah, that's the handle. Look for the blue check mark.
All right. And always a dapper dresser. Listen, I appreciate you joining us. Several topics that I'd like to talk to you about. First off, the Fed's cut the interest rate by a half of 50 points, half a percentage point, or what have you. Is this political in your mind? First and foremost, it strikes me as a little odd that they would do this now, as opposed to waiting until after the election. And then, is this going to be good or bad? I mean, temporarily, I could see this being a good thing, but this could also cause more inflation, could it not?
Oh, certainly, Carl. Let's take that last point first, if you don't mind. This half a percentage point or 50 basis point cut is not happening in a vacuum. It's happening with the backdrop of $2 trillion in annual deficits by the federal government. We just got last week the Treasury statement for the month of August. It was the worst August deficit in the history of our country. And that includes the blowout spending years of 2020 and 2021, when we had literally trillions of dollars in new spending by Congress going out the door, all allegedly in the name of fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. But the point here is that things are getting worse, not better. And not only was it the largest monthly deficit ever for August, where the government spent twice as much as it took in. You had essentially every 55 cents that the government spent was borrowed, but you also had interest on the debt surpassing $1 trillion for the fiscal year for the first time. And mind you, the fiscal year didn't even end last month. We still have to tack on the month of September as well. So you're spending well over $1 trillion a year just to finance the debt, not pay it down. It's like paying a finance charge on your credit card without actually paying down the outstanding balance. So the government is borrowing massive amounts of money. That is putting upward pressure on interest rates and on inflation. And so when you have this artificial reduction by the Fed happening with all of this going on in the background, it's a highly, highly inflationary environment. And we look very much to be repeating the mistakes of the 1970s, where we declared victory on inflation much too soon. We started cutting interest rates also much too soon, and the result was even worse inflation thereafter. Now, going to your point, Carl, real quick on why on earth are they doing this then? If the normal data that we look for that says, okay, now's a good time to cut interest rates, if those data are not showing us what we would expect, then why on earth could they possibly be doing it? Well, I can only think of two explanations, neither of which are good. One of which is, as you already mentioned, they're being highly political. We're coming up on an election, and so they are trying to influence that election. The other option, which again is also not good, is that maybe the banking system is in much worse shape than we thought it was. And what they are essentially doing here by cutting rates is trying to make it easier for banks to borrow and hide losses that are on the books. In other words, they're trying to avoid a repeat of what we saw in the spring of 2023, where you had a bunch of regional banks go under, including Silicon Valley Bank.
Oh, great. Okay, so now, wow. Okay, that's really scary. What's the likelihood percentage-wise that it could be the latter, that it could be banks are in worse shape than we imagine?
Oh, unfortunately, the odds here are really good. And it's particularly troubling that the same banks that look like they're in trouble right now are the banks that were in trouble, again, in the spring of 2023. They got on the wrong side of the interest rate trade back then. In other words, they made financial decisions, Carl, and were essentially planning on interest rates staying a lot lower, a lot longer. And so when the Fed hiked interest rates at the fastest pace in 40 years, because we had the highest inflation in 40 years, the result was those banks and the financial positions which they took no longer made sense, and the banks, a lot of them, became insolvent. Now, fast forward to today, and the problem you have with those same banks is that over 30% of their balance sheets are commercial real estate. Now, for those who haven't been keeping up with the sector, as most Americans have not been, commercial real estate is in horrible shape today. And we are in a situation much like 2005 with the residential mortgage market, where home prices had already started to fall, but the financial derivatives had not caught up yet. In other words, the real asset had declined in value, but the financial instrument has not yet declined in value. That's essentially what we're looking at today. And again, you're talking about banks who have almost a third of their balance sheet composed of potentially highly toxic assets.
What do they ultimately end up doing with those assets? Do they have to sell them off? What do they do?
Well, if we essentially repeat what the Fed did in 2007, 8, and 9, they're just going to start buying up all these bad assets. In other words, we're going to inflate away the losses. We're going to create more inflation to rob people of the value of their money in order to paper over these losses. Before the Great Recession, the global financial crisis, the mortgage meltdown, before all of that happened, the Federal Reserve had never purchased mortgage-backed securities. But they began doing that in order to bail out all of the financial institutions that had gotten on the wrong side of that trade. And so we have every reason to believe that now they're going to turn around and do the exact same thing. However, I think it's very likely now you'll have the added caveat of this money is essentially going to be used to finance the large banks taking over a lot of these small banks. Because if we look at the large banks, Carl, they've actually done pretty well in terms of not having too much commercial real estate on their books. This truly is a small bank problem today. And so I think it's going to turn, unfortunately, this is not good. I'm not happy about it, but I think it's going to turn into another case of the government bailing out the bad actors here, and it's going to benefit those who are already very, very wealthy, those who already have a lot of power. It's going to benefit the big banks because they're going to get to buy up all of these devalued assets on the cheap.
Yeah, you know what? And I fear, I know you're right with this. I bank at both a large bank, frankly, and at a small community bank. And just recently, not too long ago, I went in to get a car loan at a small bank. At the small bank, because I had done that before, done business with them with a few cars, frankly, in the past. I always buy older cars and get rid of them within a couple years or so. And so I was kind of doing the same. And then the interest rate, I'm sitting there, not trying to brag, but good credit score, all this kind of stuff. And then the interest rate they came back at me with, I'm like, wait a minute, did I walk in? Like, did I walk into the wrong bank? This is insane. And then I realized this is a small bank trying to compete with all these big giants. And the goal of the federal government appears to be under the Biden-Harris administration to centralize the banking industry. We only have about 15. All right. Actually, EJ, we'll hold there. We're going to bring EJ Anthony back on the other side. I got several other questions that I'd like for him to address. My name is Carl Jackson. I'm sitting in for the great Eldersky. You can find my podcast at the Carl Jackson Show, wherever you go to get your podcast. Callers, I'll see you out there. We'll get to you as quick as we can. Hey, Carl Jackson here. You've asked, and MyPillow has listened. They're finally bringing you the most requested offer ever. Right now, you can get the queen size premium MyPillow for just $19.98. MyPillow is made with a patented adjustable feel. It adjusts to your exact individual needs, regardless of your sleep position. It helps to keep your neck aligned, and it holds its shape all night long, so you get the best sleep of your life. But that's not all. You can get their 6-piece kitchen or bath towel sets for just $25. The brand new mattress topper for as low as $69.98, and their famous MyPillow bed sheets for as low as $25, and so much more. Go to MyPillow.com or give them a call at 800-858-0263. Use the promo code Carl, that's C-A-R-L, I don't spell it like the communists, to get huge discounts on all MyPillow products, including the premium queen size MyPillow for just $19.98. That's the lowest price ever. Don't delay. Order today. Use promo code Carl at checkout. Welcome back to the Larry Elder Show. I'm your guest host, Carl Jackson, sitting in for the great Eldersky. Callers, let me say this. If you want to, because we're going to have EJ Anthony on for a couple of segments, if you'd like to ask him a question and be quick about it, because I see some of you are calling with different topics. And so I will shift back to some of those other topics in the next hour. But I do want to deal with a lot of the economic issues that we're seeing right now, that I'd love for EJ Anthony of the Heritage Foundation to address. Okay, so EJ, before we went to the break, I was just sitting there thinking about the rates that I'm getting now at the local community bank. It's just insane, and I get that rates will be higher in some of these major banks, but I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know that they could survive, because I'll be honest, for the first time, I walked out. I'm almost ashamed to say it. I walked out of the bank that I really love, because I was like, I think I could get a better interest rate at this bigger place. And frankly, I did. And I mean, it was slightly better. And I mean, I have a great credit score, but I was like, I felt bad. And I was like, I don't want to do that, because I'm a proponent of small community banks.
Oh, sure, Carl. And here's the problem, though. You are facing, as a bank, you are facing a regulatory environment today that greatly benefits your larger competitors. And look, you need not take my word for it. Janet Yellen herself last year said that further consolidation in the banking industry would be a good thing. Now, again, context and backdrop is important here. What was the backdrop? It was the collapse of regional banks at the time. In other words, Janet Yellen saying consolidation is good was essentially her saying the collapse of additional small banks and gobbling up of the remains by the mega banks, that's a good thing for the American economy. This is our Treasury Secretary? Are you kidding me?
I know. She is such a joke. EJ, do you mind taking a quick question from one of our callers here?
Oh, I'd be happy to.
Brenda. All right, Brenda from Detroit, Michigan wants to talk about Kamala Harris and inflation. Brenda, if you could make your question quick for EJ Anthony, that would be great. I appreciate you calling in. You got the mic.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go right ahead.
Hello. You can't hear me. Yeah, my basically just asking when she is given a question, Camilla, she never answers the question directly. She goes around it and everything. I've been noticing that, that's what she's doing, so that ain't cool. And then also, with the subject you're talking about, as far as the Federal Reserve going
right.
up, whatever that was.
The interest rate, right.
Yes. My concern is, if inflation is still there and going higher, how could they, consider, wanting to do that? And let me throw this in there real quick. Back to Camilla. Is she... I'm sorry, I might not be pronouncing her name correct. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Go right ahead with your last point here, Brenda.
Real quick. Okay, is she considered trying to move us toward communism?
Okay. All right. So let me. I appreciate the call. Appreciate the questions. All right. So first off, they're cutting the interest rates. Kamala Harris will not ask a question in regards to inflation and her spending program. Is she taking us towards a socialist centralized government, EJ Anthony?
Well, she's already advocating for things like price controls, things that are right out of the Soviet Union. She has in the past, even if she's trying to walk it back now during the campaign, she has in the past advocated for getting rid of private healthcare and making it all government run. We've already seen what kind of terrible care the government provides to people in terms of healthcare. I don't think we want to expand that and force everyone into that kind of a system. But let's look at some of the other things that she wants to do. She wants to do more of the same. She wants more spending, more borrowing, more printing of money. In other words, exactly what got us into this inflationary nightmare in the first place. And by the way, she owns this issue. She bears a tremendous amount of responsibility for inflation because as vice president, part of her duties or I should say one of her duties, is to be the president of the United States Senate. And in that role, she gets to cast tie-breaking votes, which she did
That's
on
right.
at least two major spending bills, which added literally trillions of dollars to the debt and to the deficit over the course of a couple of years. And so that supercharged inflation. One analysis showed
EJ,
that she is responsible
let's
for
hold it
half
there.
of
We
all
got
the inflation since 2020.
What are one or two specific things you have in mind for that?
Well, I'll start with this. I grew up a middle-class kid. My mother raised my sister and me. She worked very hard. She was able to finally save up enough money to buy our first house when I was a teenager. I grew up in a community of hardworking people, construction workers and nurses and teachers. And I try to explain to some people who may not have had the same experience, but a lot of people will relate to this. I grew up in a neighborhood of folks who were very proud of their lawn, and I was raised to believe and to know that all people deserve dignity.
Unbelievable. That was one of the most disastrous political interviews. And I'm not saying this because I'm a conservative that I've ever seen. And I think that's what Brenda was talking about. She always evades the question. EJ Anthony, economist for the Heritage Foundation. Kamala Harris, I think, just gave us her economic plan, except she didn't give us an economic plan. She was asked how she would bring prices down. And that was her answer. She grew up in a middle-class neighborhood. Her mother had to save to buy a home. The people were very concerned about their lawns. I'm not sure that I heard how she can bring prices down, even if she should, quite frankly, being someone that's running for the presidency. Your take, EJ Anthony? Uh-oh, I don't hear him.
How fast were you going? I'm going to tell them, oh, well, officer, I was raised in a middle-class family and our lawns were green. So, so there. I mean, like, what an absolute bunch of nonsense. Every time this woman opens her mouth, it's yet another non-answer. It is just so beyond ridiculous. And Carl, at this point, the only conclusion I think we can come to is simply the fact that she doesn't have any policies. And I think that's further evidenced by the fact that shortly after former President Trump said he wants to eliminate tax on tipped income, all of a sudden she adopted that as part of her campaign as well. And previous, or I should say policies that she previously endorsed, she is now all of a sudden walking back. So again, she just seems like an empty vessel into which her handlers are pouring whatever the hot topic of the day seems to be.
Is there, in your opinion, EJ, and I got several more questions that I want to ask you, is there a way in which Trump should be, when it comes to the economy, are there things, in your opinion, that he should be saying, ways that he should be attacking her plan, non-existent plan, or things that you would like to hear him say more on the trail, on the campaign trail?
I think that he should address it similar to the way in which we talk about Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell when they talk about the economy. The Fed is cutting interest rates and saying the economy is fine, except that they're making a large interest rate cut, which is reserved for when the economy is not doing fine. Janet Yellen just went out the other day and talked about how, we have all of these illegal immigrants throughout the economy, and if we tried deporting them, it would do a massive amount of economic harm. I'm sorry, this is the woman who has spent the last 3.5 years telling us that there's really not that many illegals here and they're not affecting the labor market. They're not taking jobs from Americans. I'm sorry, guys, you can't have it both ways. And so the way that then President Trump can address Kamala Harris here is to simply say, you can't tell us that you've done a great job for the last 4 years, but then simultaneously tell us, hey, you need to send me back to Washington so I can fix everything that's wrong with the economy in another 4 years. I'm sorry, is the economy fundamentally broken, or has it been doing just fine under your leadership? Which one is it? They can't both be true. And on top of that, you can just go back to the original Reagan line, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And I think the answer there is clearly no. And again, Evidence of that answer is found in Harris's non-answers. When she is asked precisely that question and she refuses to answer it, she instead dances around it by talking about her middle-class upbringing or the fact that she's a black woman or whatever the case may be. She always brings up something that's a complete non sequitur.
Okay, so I'm speaking with EJ Anthony, economist for the Heritage Foundation. Find him online on X at Real EJ Anthony, and he's actually really good on X as well. I love checking out your X page. All right, so there's a few more things that I'd like to talk about, get your take on it. For one, the Teamsters Union declines to endorse a candidate the first time since 1996. In your opinion, is this indicative of the Teamsters Union? I mean, what are they saying here? What should we take from this? Obviously, they're not confident in Kamala Harris if they've been voting for Democrats basically ever since George H.W. Bush.
Right. And Carl, I think the other thing that's important to acknowledge here is the fact that the Teamsters, like many unions, frankly, are a case where the leadership, the so-called leadership at the top of the organization, is not actually representing the best interest of its members. And we can see that by the fact that President Trump is actually quite popular among a lot of these unions, whether it's the Teamsters, whether it's auto workers, whatever the case may be. We find this also in a lot of mining and oil and gas extraction jobs that are unionized as well, where former President Trump is actually wildly popular among a lot of these folks, except the union leadership hate him because they're beholden to Democrats. And so because right now I think that those union leaders are essentially facing a kind of revolt among their membership, they can't come out and endorse Kamala Harris today.
Yeah, that's so. I mean, it's so fascinating. I mean, these are the guys. I was listening to a union truck driver on Fox News. I can't recall which show. But I mean, basically, I'm like, this is a guy that's on the ground. This is a trucker. He understands what's happening with the economy. He's seeing this stuff firsthand. And if they want to endorse Trump over Kamala Harris, obviously they saw something during the Trump administration that they're not seeing in this current administration. We only have 30 seconds left in this block. I'm speaking to EJ Anthony of the Heritage Foundation. Check him out on X. He's going to join us just for one more block to close it up on this hour. EJ, when we get back, if you want to be thinking about this, census data shows Americans haven't gotten a pay raise since Trump was president. I think that aligns with the union story. And then also the government shutdown. Should we not? More with EJ Anthony from the Heritage Foundation. When we get back, I'm Carl Jackson in for the great Eldersky. All right, welcome back to the program. I'm your guest host, Carl Jackson, sitting in, joined by my guest, EJ Anthony of the Heritage Foundation. I'm just taking a look at his latest column, For America's Military, A Death by 1,000 Drones. Honestly, EJ, Zach just sent this to me. I'm just looking at some of the key takeaways. And good Lord, I'm going to have you back on when I'm back in to talk about this. This is, wow, these are some really great points. Really great points. Check them out at the Heritage Foundation, Daily Signal, For America's Military, A Death by 1,000 Drones. Very good title as well. Okay, so EJ, now let me, just a couple of minutes left. Just your, a couple of points still. Trump calls for a government shutdown. Also, there's census data revealing that Americans haven't gotten a pay raise since Trump was president. I feel that's a duh moment, but take on both of those, if you will. Government shutdown. I hate calling it that. And also, Americans not getting a pay raise since Trump.
Yeah, Carl, we should be clear as far as the government shutdown is concerned. The government has plenty of money that has already been allocated to pay for the absolute necessities in order to continue financing the debt. So paying outstanding treasury bills, bonds, and notes. They have money to continue sending out Social Security checks, for example. We're still going to be able to fund a lot of these government projects and infrastructure on which so many millions of Americans rely. It's just a matter of all of the bloated discretionary spending is going to have to temporarily stop. Oh no, cry me a river. I mean, it's absolute nonsense that the bureaucrats here in DC think that they can essentially continue to just live on the taxpayer dime forever and never have to even do so much as to create a budget like every single American household wants to do or has to do if they want to stay solvent. I mean, it's just absolutely appalling the complete and total lack of any kind of fiscal discipline here in Washington, D.C.
You know, and the great news, too, EJ, is that Kamala Harris has promised that if she becomes president, you'll no longer need a degree to become a federal government employee. So we have that to look forward to, too. All right, we have less than a minute left. Americans are not making as much money under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Sounds like a duh moment to me, but your take.
Oh, absolutely, Carl. You're 100% right here. Again, every American knows that they are worse off today than they were 4 years ago, simply because prices have risen so much faster than their incomes. Yes, it's true that the average American's paycheck is larger today than it was 4 years ago, but prices are up even more. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics confirms that. Now, this data you're talking about from the Census Bureau also confirms it. And it's only the elites here in D.C. who are so removed from the average American who actually need these reports to realize what's going on, because the average American lives it every single day.
All right. EJ Anthony from the Heritage Foundation, great economist. Check him out online at Real EJ Anthony on X. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate your time.
All right, guys, don't forget, subscribe to the podcast wherever you go to get your podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and Rumble, and subscribe to The Carl Jackson Show. Until next time, don't grow weary doing good. God bless you.